Oops, I got to turn on a microphone.
Working? Can I hear anything?
Yep, I hear it. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm John Miglosh for the WDMA. And we're going to be talking about speaking CFO today. And this is in anticipation of our upcoming WDMA spring meetup. It's tomorrow, 3 p.m. Tomorrow is the 10th of April, 3 p.m. Chicago time. And I've got a pretty good group of people coming already. I won't kick anybody out, but you want to get over there and check it out. I have a couple of posts up. I'll probably put some more up. You can look up Wisconsin DMA on LinkedIn and find the links, or you can write to me, john@wdma.org, and I will send you the magic Zoom links to get to the session. But that's about all you need to know. So we're going to talk about, on my profile on LinkedIn, I have that I speak CFO, that I'm CFO fluent. I don't know, that might be a little bit of a stretch. You know, I took 5 or 6 years of Spanish. I wasn't really fluent in that, and that's more than I've studied accounting formally. But I've worked with a lot of CEOs, and they usually bring along the CFO. And sometimes we talk about the marketing people, right? And so I do know something about that. And we're going to talk about some stories today. I really hope that we don't go too long, but we'll see. It's always good. Let's see if I'm streaming. The live stream kind of froze up, so I don't know if I'm streaming or not. Let's see. Controls. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like I'm streaming, so let's double check here for a second. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, it looks like I am. Okay, so I'll just keep reloading until I get some confirmation, but we'll just go on. I can always upload it later. There it goes. Looks good. Anyway, I don't know what's the deal there. It's freezing. Well, it looks like it's going good. So I just saw David Rosendahl post. He's going to do a webinar tomorrow, probably much better attended. And he's talking about how clients in the printing industry are saying, well, there's a big postal increase coming, and so we're going to cut back our circ, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about Cabela's, which is long in the history, but I learned a lot from Dick Cabela. I got to work directly with Dick, and our first drop was in a big postal increase. In those days, they were rare and they were bigger, I think. And but the key to dealing with postal issues is getting a bigger budget, right? And so we're talking about how do you explain to your CFO why they should give you a bigger portion of the budget, especially when times might be getting tight. It's hard to say, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's see if I can get this thing going. Okay, I just subscribed to this YouTube channel. I don't know where this person's coming from, but he just did one the other day explaining how billionaires don't pay themselves and yet make billions. And this one, actually, this episode, it's called Generic Art Dad. It's a funny name, but some of his posts have millions of views, like 6 million views. And so YouTube obviously likes him because he doesn't even have 100,000 subscribers. This one was about how a financier could gut a company and then use that and then increase revenue by selling off the assets, reduce costs by firing everybody, and then get the same bank to give him a couple of $100 million because he's shown such great improvement on the P&L. Pretty funny, huh? And it's fascinating. And what it shows, his whole shtick is showing how high finance is different than the average person thinks, right? Very, very interesting, which is the way I kind of look at trying to speak CFO. That would be my third language, after English and a little Spanish. Now I'm trying to speak CFO. And I have to realize that not only do I speak a different language as a marketer, but I'm thinking and my whole worldview, my whole perspective is completely different. Now, I've pretty much made a career of speaking to CFOs and CEOs. So I can't say that I'm not good at it, but I will say that it's something difficult to get your head around. There's a war between marketing and accounting. And boy, many times I get called in to evaluate an acquisition valuation, sometimes do a deposition and and explain what the seller did to puff the P&L for the short term, to manipulate the valuation. I've done that for some big companies, Dress Barn, which is one of them, which was the acquirer. So I testified on their behalf. And long ago, though, it's, confidentiality's all expired. It was a lot of fun. And I did some work for Deluxe Business Forums way back, before I was even out on my own. And they were sending out a catalog like this. I changed the pagination and immediately saved them $160,000, so they liked me. But the accounting department was mystified because their revenue was 10% different than the marketing's reporting on revenue. Actually, the accounting revenue was higher, and they couldn't figure it out. And we spent 2 days talking between accounting, marketing, and me. It turned out that marketing was compensated as a multiplier by gross margin. And so they didn't want to add in the shipping charges, which were not marked up, or the sales tax, which was not marked up. So it eroded their margin percent and therefore their bonus if they included this pass-through revenue. But when I figured it out, which was like a light bulb, I said to the accounting people, revenue's revenue, right? And they said, absolutely. So anyway, after the meeting ended, after we successfully uncovered the marketing shenanigans, I went back to the cubicles with the accounting people, and they said, if you wanted to, you could be an accountant. And so that was one of my very earliest, and I take a lot of pride in that. I think it's a wonderful thing for them to say, right? I'm not sure. Well, I don't know that I would want to. I do quite a bit of accounting as it is. So, but anyway, let's go on. So one of the biggest differences between marketing and accounting is that marketing is future. Okay, I used to get very discouraged when I was at a company. Now it's called Norscot, but in those days it was called Sales Guides. I helped found a catalog, and we grew it to 10 million in sales in just 3 years from really nothing. And they ended up selling it for quite a bit of money, which made them very happy. By then I had left. But I would do the sales projections for the year, and I think out of those 6 years, I had 4 years where I was within 5%, and I think I had like 3 years where I was within 2%, which in sales projections, especially when you're growing a great deal, very, very difficult to predict revenue like that, given the economic uncertainties of the future. But I was always sort of bullied by the accountant, by the CFO, because my numbers, he said, your numbers never add up. Your numbers come out the way you said. His numbers always came out the way he said. What I didn't realize is that he was looking in the rearview mirror, and I was trying to guess the future. And there's a lot of difference between trying to guess the future and sorting out the financial history that your company's just been through. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to be a CFO, because they have to predict the future to some extent too. I'm just saying don't let them bully you around. But questions of branding, offer, price, positioning, markets, they all deal with strategic future. And if we get it right, we can make a lot of money. It's been my experience. But what does the CEO want? What does he really want? And this varies. This is not universal. But a lot of it is predictable marketing. He wants to know. I learned this from Bob Meyer, one of my mentors. I worked for Bob for a couple of years. He wants to know what markets we're going after. He wants to know what the return on investment is, and he would love to know if there's a way we can have scalable growth so that we can spend X and get X 0.5 or something like that. Something that makes sense. Okay, that's what the CEO wants. Now, Eric Nordstrom on a stock call, this was many years ago, he admitted about Nordstrom's, the results were hurt by stopping their use of direct mail. They had been sending coupons forever and ever, decades, to their best customers, and it would drive traffic to the stores. And they decided they could do it all on email. And it bombed, and they really bombed. Now, that wouldn't be the best way to test it. The best way was to just pick a couple of stores and try doing that insanity. But the point is, Eric had to admit that what they were doing didn't work. Eric didn't like doing that, okay? Jill, Linda Heasley, she was president and CEO. She said we plan to shift from direct mail to alternative media options. Read digital. In hindsight, we moved too much too soon. And I've heard that from many different kinds of marketers. But the point isn't that it was a mistake. The point is they don't like making mistakes. So if you don't want to make mistakes, you got to think more clearly about the future, right? And how does that work? When I started working with Cabela's, as I said, we had a big postal increase, and they hired me and said the best we can do is worse than the worst you can do. So just pull the names and we'll see what happens. And it was about 5 million customer names, the first fishing drop of the year. And they told me that we actually made 2.4 million. I've got saved, but that's not really right. That should be more profit on the first drop. And I actually have a graph of the model that we used. And this was back when we were just starting modeling. The CFO didn't like the methodology because we didn't really have holdout tests and we didn't do it. It wasn't really very careful. Later, we did it more carefully. And then we generated 454,000 more in profit on a 2 million piece test. And it's spam risk again. That is, I'm getting rid of my voice over IP provider because I get 5 or 6 calls like that a day. We're going to figure it out. Okay, so this is the model. And you can see that the profit peaked here. This is circulation going this way. Okay, and profitability is going, or as probably respond. Yeah, it's profitability. It's 100% of the profitability, but the 100% of the mail doesn't hit till way over here. And so we could have stopped mailing probably someplace in about here, which would have been about 60% of the of the circulate. Well, not even. Whoa, it's about 40%. Oops, of the circulation. It's about 40% of the circulation right there. Okay, so I said to Dick, "Hey, we could cut your circ 20% and make you and only cut revenue 5%, which it would have." Here's sales. If we cut here, well, in this case we could cut let's say we cut 20% of the circ. Yeah, so we're going to still cut 10% of the revenue, something like that. So he said, "I don't want to cut my revenue. I'd have to lay people off. Show me how to make money. Don't show me and how to grow. Don't show me how to shrink the company." And so we figured out how to do that. And that's been sort of my career objective ever since. But see, you have to understand how these numbers interact, and that you have to do. And here's that second test that we did, 73% profit improvement without cutting circ. Okay, and that was even better. Okay, and here's a graph. Here's really what we were doing in our modeling is we were changing the differential, the slope of the segments. So here we had something like quintiles, and by changing the slope, you can figure out an optimization. The green you can see is fairly flat, which means cutting here doesn't do you any much better than cutting here. So cutting is probably not the answer. But when you've got a differential like this, when you've got this change, then you can make a lot more money. Now, what I should have said to Dick was, well, let's take 10% of your mailing and let's funnel it back into a different place to spend it, which is what we did later. What we found was we could mail 4-year-old buyers that would outperform the most recent buyers, partly because they'd been cutting out recent buyers, which they should have, because the most recent buyers, when you're pulling the fishing names in the fall for spring, is the hunters. And that's more, there's more about that in my book, but we'll just go on. But the point is, I learned a lot from Dave. Okay, so how do we predict? If we're thinking about the future, how do we predict the future, right? That is the question. The answer is you got to have causal connections. You got to be able to tell why, if you put $1 into the marketing box, out jumps $1.50 or $3 or whatever of EBITDA type profit. How does science predict it? Well, what science does and engineering is they've isolated and identified and validated causal forces so they get repeatable effects. Now that's absolutely the opposite of what people are trying to do in AI, which is tweaking the customer selection and not knowing why, not knowing what's going on or why. Will it increase the results? Maybe, but if it doesn't, you won't know what's going on, and it will never give you the kind of insight into new markets and new products and things that you can get if you do it differently. But that's another issue. So what I see is the CFO willing to spend millions on ERP and big data, but little on testing. Testing is the key to setting up context and meaning, and you have to set it up with an objective to take action. So does anyone love testing? I did a talk for Cohere One with Travis Seaton years ago, and I actually called a bunch of big clients and a bunch of big mailers, and I said, do you test enough? What do you think do you think your company tests enough? And they said, well, I get a lot of pushback. It's complicated. Can we really test across channels? The answer is yes, but I can understand, yes, it is complicated. Retailers, one was a big retailer. As retailers, we don't have a testing culture. So they said they didn't test near enough. Another big mailer said we test and retest the lists, but not the big stuff, not the strategic stuff. And a digital marketer said we measure clicks, persistence, source, but do we test? Not really. And this one was the scariest one, and this was from one of the oldest catalog companies in America. And they said our CFO doesn't like tests because holdouts, in other words, we have an idea for a test and we have an A and a B, and A is going to win and B is not going to win, let's say, or it could be the other way around, doesn't matter. But one of the two isn't going to win. And the CFO says, I get compensated on profitability, EBITDA, and to the extent that you mail something inferior, we actually make less profit. And so, and this is a great illustration. So what the CFO is saying is, if you are so smart as marketers, pick the right one and go with that. And don't mess around with trying to validate that with a test. Well, the problem is we don't know the right one. That's why we test. And that's why the CFO struggles with you. And that's why you have to talk with them and you have to explain this stuff. Okay? So it would appear, Hopkins, that your gut feel was only indigestion. That's what the CFO thinks, especially when your results are bad. Okay, this is one of my early tests. I learned a lot from this. This was a 600,000 piece test, and I'd been giving out. Look at those two covers and see what's the difference. 300,000 of each. It wasn't a trivial test, but it was a trivial change in the look of the cover. And what it was this one had big name companies, and this one had your imprint here, and a variety of different ways. I let the creative people do it in different fonts, different ways, and blah, blah, blah. But basically, if you step back from it a little, you'll say, nah, those are almost identical. Yes, we try to do it as identical as possible. Every character of the catalog, every image, everything inside, all the way the rest of the way was identical to the two. Just that one picture change. And it was a 40% change. 40% difference. And that's because I was giving out the catalogs, and my buddies who owned businesses said, why would I want a Pontiac hat? Or why would I want a Caterpillar tractor mug? And I said, no, this is you can put your company on there. Oh, my company on there. And that made all the difference, and that changed the entire valuation of the company. We'll skip some of these. General Motors had me in, and they said, and I asked why I was here, and they said, who would have bought a car without the $5,000? And I said, well, what answer would you like? And they said, well, we thought you were the data guy. We wanted you to tell us what the data said. I said, yeah, but you didn't set it up right. You told everybody they could have the $5,000. You should have not told some of the people and see what they did. Now, there's another way to look at it, which isn't as accurate, but they could have looked at a baseline before they started giving the 5,000 away. Say this is the repeat buying rate that we had before this, and this is the repeat buying rate after. That would have been an easy way. I should have said that. It might have made me $1 million, but instead I just pointed out that they hadn't set it up right at the beginning. Musician's friend had tested 11 times against me with 6 different modeling companies over 6 years of tests, and we won them all. But one of the things that we did was we had a lot of crazy ideas, and one was the werewolf variable. Travis Seaton? I think he was part of the instigators of that, and it was somebody at Cohere one anyway. And so we created the distance from the full moon. And it turned out, shop on the full moon, it turned out that there were no more sales during the full moon, but there were fewer people bought, about half as many, which means they were twice as valuable, 2x the sales per customer. Amazing stuff. Okay, we've had a lot of fun. And the full moon variable came up repeatedly in certain segments. Okay. Not in the best RFM, not in the best recency, but in the not so much the best, right? And then, and then the full moon marketing came up. These are like 6-month buyers. Pretty funny, huh? Yeah, it was pretty funny. Anyway, we'll go on. The last thing I want to talk about is this case study. You've heard it before. It was a retailer, furniture, and what we did was change the valuation quite dramatically, which helped them go public. The CEO said that the marketing department was the best he'd ever seen at allocating funds. What does that mean? It means that they explained why they were making money the way they were. They tested across channels, and he gave them a lot of credit. And I can't take all of that credit, but I can say I showed them how they were generating 900% return on investment EBITDA. We applied that then to traffic building, and this was on the catalog. We then started testing offers and found that there was one offer that was dramatically better than the others. And then we were able to prospect and acquire customers with mail, and we integrated their TV with mail retargeting. It was great. Well, and so anyway, in conclusion, if you're going to speak CFO, you want to get to the cause, like science and engineering do. Okay? It's not just about incremental improvement unless you can track it back to the causal difference. But once the CFO and the CEO understand that, they will give you more money because they've never seen anybody do that before. Okay? And so you can vary the offer, you can vary the terms, always test something. Testing is learning, and make sure you bring the CFO in on it, right? Testing ultimately makes you money, right? And that's the key to speaking CFO. Have a great day. Like and share. Your friends will know you're smart.